I'm Brittany, this is Hua-Chung, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things. Today, we are continuing Erha Volume 4, and we actually have a couple of very special things that are happening in this stream. One, I have the little, what I'm calling the Gaywatch break room for you guys. For the break that we have in the middle of this stream, there is an actual room that I have decorated for you guys in the program, basically, that I use. It's not really a game, but it's in the game store. It's called Spirit City Lo-Fi Sessions. I have a little room for you guys there that will then have rain sounds and fireplace sounds, and it'll be all nice and cozy. I will show that to you guys on the break. And then also, we're giving away... Hang on, I put one on top of the other. We are giving away Volume 3 of Erha today. I'm going to be a tease and make you wait until the top of the break before we actually give it away. But that is happening. It is now officially too late to enter because I already have all of the names in the little randomizer on this tab open right here. And when we get to the break, I'll hit randomize and I will announce the winner of whoever wins Volume 3. This is the copy that I read the whole time, and one of you guys will be getting that today. So, there is also, this is specifically the time, apparently, where my neighbor felt it was deeply necessary to edge his lawn. And like, I can hear it. I don't know if you can, but this was not the type of edging that I was hoping would be on this stream. You know what I'm saying? So I'm going to do my best to not focus on that the whole time. But I really don't think I will, actually, considering where this whole farming thing is going. And also, the next chapter is literally called Shizun Just Might Blue Ball Me to Death, so maybe the edging is appropriate. Maybe that's actually kind of on brand for this stream. Maybe my neighbor's really doing something and he's just trying to help me out. We are on page 201 for chapter 138. We read for a couple of hours. We take a break about halfway through. There are trigger warnings to be found in the description of this video that you should probably avail yourself of if you have ever needed trigger warnings kind of ever. Also in the description are the chapters we will be reading today. So we are doing 138 through, double check me, but I think 141 today. I don't think we're doing 142. And I believe that's it. There are lots of new people in the stream, and by that I mean people who have not read this before. I haven't read it before. There are plenty of newbies who have also not read it before, so please, easy on the spoilers. No spoilers, preferably, so that we can experience it right along with you guys. You have got to hear that, correct? He's now, like, cranking something. No, he's still edging, so sure. Sure. We'll just edge through the whole thing. It's fine. It's not like we didn't do that last stream, but I suppose it applies to this one. Chu Wanning directed a mild glance at Mo Run. Someone's looking for you. Who could be looking for me at this hour? Mo Run, whose mind was completely occupied by Chu Wanning. What else is new? Had long since forgotten whatever had happened during the day with the villagers. It's the young lady who was singing earlier, Chu Wanning said in a pointedly understated tone. You know, the prettiest girl in the village. Really? All the girls in the village look more or less the same to me. Chu Wanning was silent for a moment. I was only gone for 5 years. When did you go blind? Mo Run blinked in surprise. Chu Wanning's tone was unchanged, but when Mo Run looked up, he caught a hint of a smile in Chu Wanning's eyes, as if teasing him with good-humored banter. Pleasantly surprised, Mo Run felt his mood instantly lift. Oh my god, we've got our first real banter. We've got our first real... No, I wasn't prepared to start that way. No, I don't think... Chu Wanning... teasing in this way? Chu Wanning smiling? Hello? Why are we starting? You gotta ease me into it, man. We're starting a chapter with this? Outside, the village girl named Linger was holding a bundle wrapped in blue cloth with a white floral pattern, hollering as loud as she could at Mo-run's door. Mo Shinjun, I'm over here. Linger turned at the sound of a man's deep voice behind her, only to see Mo-run leaning in the doorway, lifting one side of the curtain and smiling at her. It's already so late. Did you need something? Linger was momentarily startled, but her shock quickly melted into delight. Happily, she went to him. Good thing Shenjun hasn't gone to bed yet. Here, this is for you. I got it from my auntie, like I mentioned during lunch earlier. Please use it. She pushed the cloth bag she carried into his arms as she spoke. Mo-run opened the bag and found 3 little clay jars. What are these? Medicinal salve, Linger explained brightly, pointing at her own cheek with a smile, for your mosquito bite in the field earlier. Ah, Mo-run finally remembered what this was all about. He found himself a little abashed that the girl had so wholeheartedly believed his offhand excuse and come all this way to give him the salve. The villagers here were rather too gullible. No. Well, yes, but also no. Gullible's not the word. You must have not gotten bit too badly, though. Linger raised herself up on tiptoe and gave Mo-run's face a careful once-over, smiling even more sunnily. I don't even see a bump. Mo-run cleared his throat. I am a cultivator, after all. Linger clapped her hands with a laugh. You cultivators are so interesting. If I had the talent for it, I'd want to become one too. Too bad it's not in the stars for me. Oh, this girl down bad. Oh. Oh, no, this girl. They chatted a bit longer until Mo-run thanked her and ducked back inside with the salve. Chuan-ning had moved to the table and was flipping idly through the book Mo-run had abandoned. He looked up when he heard Mo-run come in. Medicinal salve, Mo-run explained bashfully. Did you really get bit? Come here. Let me see. Under the candlelight, Mo-run's skin was the deep amber of honey candy, accentuating his dashing features. Chuan-ning stared for a while before asking, So, where's the bite? I would like to take this opportunity to highlight the priorities of a danmei novel. And I love this so much. The girl examines his cheek, and it's resolved in like a sentence of she like sunnily like looks in his face. Chuan-ning does it, and it's a whole under the candlelight. Mo-run's skin was the deep amber of honey candy, accentuating dashing features. It just tickles me. You're like, of course, Brittany, naturally, that's where the focus is. But it's still, you know, maybe it's from my queer shipping years beginning and really taking off during the 2010s. But stuff like that, it's the little things like that the novelty will never wear off for me, personally. Mo-run scratched his head, embarrassed. It went down already. My skin's thick. He set all 3 jars of the refreshing medicinal salve on Chuan-ning's table as he spoke. I don't need these. Shizun should hang on to them instead, since you are more likely to get bug bites. Chuan-ning neither accepted nor declined. First the herbal ointment, and now this medicinal salve. I'll have to open an apothecary at this rate. Is that another joke? Sorry. Mo-run only rubbed at his handsome nose and beamed, quiet and sincere. Chuan-ning reached out and poked at his forehead. It's getting late. Go back to your room and go to sleep. Sleep well, Shizun. Sleep well. That's a scene break. But that night, in those 2 run-down straw huts separated by that small courtyard the width of 10 steps, neither of the 2 found sleep. Despite their exchanged wishes, both tossed and turned restlessly. Chuan-ning could still feel the tingling in his feet, could practically still feel Mo-run's calloused fingers rubbing against his skin. Mo-run's thoughts were rather more complicated. He shifted this way and that, head pillowed on his arm while he tapped fitfully at the seam between the bedboards, repeating over and over in his head, Shizun is a god, an immortal, an otherworldly being. No matter what happened in the past life, I definitely won't do anything stupid in this one. I definitely won't bully him, definitely won't mess things up again. And besides, there was still Shumei. Yes, he should think more about Shimei instead. Shimei? He suddenly felt doubly uneasy. The fact was, since returning to Sishong Peak and reuniting with Shimei, Mo-run had found himself feeling rather lukewarm toward him. To him, liking Shimei and protecting Shimei had settled into a kind of habit, a thing that he consistently did. But to what end? He still felt fond of the Shimei of 5 years ago, but the beautiful man of today was like a stranger to him. This new unfamiliarity left him at a loss. He didn't know what was wrong with him, or what he ought to do about it. Chuan-ning woke up early the next morning. When he stepped outside, he came face to face with Mo-run, who was lifting the curtain of his own room. "Good morning, Shizun," Mo-run said. "Morning." Chuan-ning glanced at him. "Didn't sleep well." Mo-run summoned up a smile. "I'm not really used to the bed. It's all right, I'll just take a nap later." They set off toward the fields together, the early morning breeze bringing the refreshing fragrance of grass and trees. It was quiet on their walk over, the silence broken only by the occasional singing of frogs and chirping of cicadas. Chuan-ning yawned languidly, then caught something out of the corner of his eye that made him smile. "Mo-run." Chuan-ning reached over to brush through Mo-run's... What? Hang on! What? Chuan-ning reached over to brush through Mo-run's bangs and plucked a piece of straw from his hair. He said with a small smile, "What were you doing, rolling around in bed? You've got straw in your hair." We know what the chapter title is, and yet I'm still here just... Mo-run was about to defend himself when he spotted a piece of straw on the side of Chuan-ning's head as well. Guys. Calm down. He also smiled and said, "Then Shizun must have been rolling around too," and picked the golden straw off Chuan-ning's hair. Something, thinking about rolling around in the hay together, something. As the sun crested the eastern horizon, master and disciple gazed at each other against a backdrop of resplendent gold. Fuck off! One with his head slightly lowered, the other with his head slightly tipped up, just the way they had in the past. Except that, 5 years ago, the one looking down had been Chuan-ning, and the one gazing up had been Mo-run. But the years had flown by, and Mo-yu was no longer a youth. In this moment, it was as if time was finally willing to slow down. In the light of that gentle dawn, Mo-run jumped into the paddy field on impulse, opening his arms and smiling at the man standing on the raised ridge. "Shizun, jump. I'll catch you." Chuan-ning eyed the drop from the ridge to the field. It was only waist high. "Is something wrong with your head?" He took off his shoes and gracefully hopped down onto the paddy field himself, sending a ripple through the water and a chill up through the bottom of his feet. With a grand sweep of one broad sleeve and an air of imposing dignity, Chuan-ning claimed a large stretch of the field for himself. "This whole area is mine. I didn't cut as much as you yesterday, but today I fully intend to beat you." Mo-run's outstretched arms went instead to scratch his head. The corners of his lips quirked up, and an especially charming smile spread across his face. "Okay, if I lose, I'll make Shizun lots and lots of Lotus Crisp and lots of stewed crab meatballs. And lots of honey-glazed sweet lotus root, too," Chuan-ning added. I just can't take just lively Chuan-ning, for lack of a better word. Like, what is happening? The flame is thawing the ice. We know what's happening, but I still can't. It's going to take me like volumes to catch up. "Sure thing. But what if Shizun loses?" Mo-run's eyes were clear and bright, like they enclosed the entire starry sky. I'm freaking out too hard. "Then what?" Chuan-ning shot him a cool sidelong glance. What do you want? Mo-Run mulled it over for some time, chewing on his bottom lip. Finally, he said, if Shizun loses, Shizun will have to eat all the Lotus Crisps and stewed crab meatballs I make. A pause. And then, in an even gentler tone, carried on the refreshing breeze, and all the honey-glazed sweet lotus root, too. In his head, this is not said out loud, win or lose, I just want an excuse to treat you well. That's a scene break. Okay. It's so well earned that any softness from either side knocks me right the fuck over. And she did that in 3 volumes. And the 4th volume has been paying that off in this way. It's terrifying that I'm not even halfway through this story. It's ridiculous. And also, can I just say, for long form stories, just the really long ones, they're so rewarding for so many reasons. But one of the other great things about such long stories is that you have time to do stuff like this. She has time to take a whole ass volume just for this kind of tone, just for this kind of story. You have such a unique opportunity with something so huge to really veer off into all kinds of different, almost genres, really. You can switch it up for a long time in a way that obviously you just don't have the time to do in shorter stories as opposed to long, huge series. And it's being pulled off to tremendous effect here, is what I mean to say. I love that we have this whole ass, what feels kind of like a departure from what we've had so far. And I never would have asked for it, is the thing. She's smarter than me. She was looking at it, she's like, no, you need this long and this in depth. You need this right now. Cruel and unusual. Sick and twisted, she is. In this short interval, Chu Wanning had gotten quite adept at harvesting rice, and he did not like to lose. It was enough that he had been laughed at yesterday. He was not going to be the butt of jokes today, too. Huffily thinking thus, he worked with singular diligence, slicing away at the stalks, and by midday he'd cut down a good deal more than Mo-Run. He felt rather proud of himself as they took their lunch under the mulberry tree. He didn't say it, nor did it show on his face, but his eyes kept wandering over to the side of the paddy field, where the rice he'd harvested was stacked into a formidable little mountain of gold. Everyone sat together to eat. Mo-Run ate without pause, and his bowl was clean in no time. Noticing his empty bowl, the auntie was quick to speak up. "Ling-Er, go get Shenjun another helping of rice." But Mo-Run set down his bowl and chopsticks like he was in a hurry. He flashed a smile and said, "That's all right, I'm done. I have something to take care of, so I'm going to run out for a bit. It might take a while, so go ahead and finish eating without me." Ling-Er was taken by surprise, which turned into unease. "Does Shenjun really eat so little? Is the food not to your taste? If you don't like it, I could go make something else for you?" No, that's not it. The food's great." Of course, Mo-Run was completely oblivious to the overtones of the girl's offer. Yup. He brushed her off with a forthright grin and took off toward the stable with large strides. "Where are you going?" Chu Wanning asked. Mo-Run looked back over his shoulder with a smile. "Just a little shopping. I'll be right back." He has a lot of cooking to do, after all. "Shenjun, it's fine. Let him be," Chu Wanning said mildly as he closed his chopsticks around another piece of fried tofu. Although the two cultivators had arrived together, anyone with eyes could see who had the higher status and who the lower, and whose word counted. Moreover, Chu Ning's naturally cold and severe features made it difficult for the villagers to press the matter once he'd spoken. They could only let Mo Run go. After lunch, everyone split into small groups, some passing the time by chewing tobacco, some napping in the sunshine. The women sat together knitting winter clothes while the children played, riding on bamboo stick horses. A rail-thin cat sniffed hopefully at the ground, its little pink nose twitching and ears perked, looking for leftovers to eat. Chu Ning was resting against a pile of grain, with a cup of warm tea when he saw the pitifully skinny cat. He raised a hand to entice it over, thinking to find it something to eat, but the cat was wary of strangers. It thought that Chu Ning had raised his hand to hit it and fled immediately. Chu Ning stared after it mutely. Did he really look so scary? Even cats didn't like him. As he sulked with cheek in hand, he heard the jingling of copper pieces. Ling Er came over cheerfully, also holding a cup of tea, and sat down beside Chu Ning. He turned to look at her with an impassive expression. This girl was very pretty, and on top of that, she wasn't skinny or frail, but the kind of full-figured woman rarely found in such remote and desolate places. She knew how to dress herself, too. She hadn't any money to buy accessories, so she'd gathered some bits of copper and iron, then cleaned them and ground them into smooth rings to string along the hem of her clothing, so that she jingled as she walked and gleamed under the sun. "Shenjun," she called, with a voice that was crisp as a ripened berry. "What is it?" Chu Ning's voice was cool and clear as drifting mist. Ling Er was a bit taken aback by his standoffishness. There's no T at the end of that word. But she quickly put on a smile, as if he had been perfectly amicable, and said, "Nothing. I just saw you sitting by yourself and thought I'd come over and keep you company." Chu Ning eyed her. He knew he didn't have a friendly-looking face. Not even the cat wanted to get close to him, not unlike him not wanting to get close to this woman. Yet people and cats were different, after all. Cats had no schemes, but people might have ulterior motives. Sure enough, after a cascade of chatter full of empty pleasantries and trifling nonsense, Ling Er threw out her real question casually. "Shenjun, what does it take to become a disciple at Xisheng Peak? Do you think I have a chance?" Wow, you want to talk about down bad. She's like, what if I just moved to this peak and became a cultivator just so that I could, you know. "Give me your hand," said Chu Ning. Her eyes widened and she excitedly did as she was told. Chu Ning pressed the tips of his fingers lightly against the inside of her wrist. After a moment, he drew back. "You do not." Ling Er's face instantly flushed red. Do I not have the aptitude?" "You knew I was going to check your core as soon as I asked for your hand, so you must have already had someone check for you in the past," Chu Ning said. "You don't have the aptitude for cultivation, and you will likely be unable to build the foundation for it, even if you spend your whole life trying. It would only be a waste of time were you to go to the peak. I'd suggest forgetting about it." Not like he was going to phrase that kindly or delicately. Ling Er fell silent and her head drooped, crestfallen. A long while passed before she bit her lip and said in a small voice, "Thank you for the advice." "You're welcome." She left quietly. Maybe she was kind of legitimately asking after cultivation, Watching her go, Chu Ning felt a little conflicted. The common folk of the lower cultivation realm hoped more fervently to join a cultivation sect than those of the upper realm. To the people of the upper cultivation realm, cultivation was a means of bringing honor to one's ancestors and making a name for oneself. But to people of the lower cultivation realm, acceptance into a sect was sometimes a means of survival. Leaning back against the pile of grain, Chu Ning took another sip of tea. The weather really was getting cooler. The tea had gone cold in the few short moments he'd left it alone. He gulped the rest down and closed his eyes, thinking to rest for a bit. But with how poorly he'd slept last night, together with all the strenuous labor of the morning, he ended up falling dead asleep. When he woke again, the sky was already a deep red, and crows were cawing in the branches. All that was left between the paddy fields were sheaves of rice, neatly arranged in scattered pieces of grain. Chu Ning's eyes snapped wide open in startlement. To think he had slept all the way to sundown, propped against the pile of grain like this. The farmers probably hadn't had the guts to wake him on account of his status. Not only had they let him sleep the day away, someone had even covered him with an article of clothing so he wouldn't catch cold. Whoever could that have been? He paused. This clothing. He was about to sit up when he recognized a familiar scent. Coming fully awake, he looked down at the cloth covering him. The fabric was coarse but very clean, with the refreshing scent of the soap beans used in its laundering still clinging to its seams. It was Mo-Run's clothing. Upon realizing this, Chuan-Ning found himself hastily slumping back down, the muscles in his back relaxing as he hid half his face under the clothing. Only a pair of bright eyes were left showing, slightly narrowed, holding some kind of indescribable and indecipherable emotion within. He really must have lost his mind. Squinting, he scanned the paddy fields for the man he sought. It didn't take long. Mo-Run had grown so handsomely tall that he stood out effortlessly wherever he went. From where he sat, Chuan-Ning could see only his back as he helped the villagers load the sheaves of grain onto the ox cart. Mo-Run was probably hot from having worked all day and had stripped out of his outer robe and shirt like the other villagers, leaving his rugged, honey-toned back in full view. In the searing heat of the sinking sun, sweat slid slowly down the lines of his broad back, with every flex of his muscles, trickling to the dimples of his back, snaking beneath the toned line of his waist. Chuan-Ning was like a red-hot iron, like a coal in the furnace, taking every tender sentiment and turning it into burning carnal desire. Red-hot iron indeed. As he studied Mo-Run from a distance, everything else faded out of his consciousness, leaving only that person's gorgeous body, the flex of his muscles as sleek as a panther's, his profile whenever he turned to chat with the village chief, with its soft dimple and kind gaze, overflowing with handsome charm. As if he'd sensed the eyes on his back, Mo-Run turned to look over his shoulder. Chuan-Ning hurriedly shut his eyes and pretended to be asleep, but his heart beat so fast it sounded like a rainstorm, and the blood racing through his veins was a low rumble in his ears. Several seconds passed before he sneakily cracked open one eyelid and peeked out from under his lashes. Mo-Run had already turned back around, and Ling-Er was walking up to him with a bashful gaze and a handkerchief in her hand. "Shanjun, here, wipe your sweat." Mo-Run, whose arms were filled with the rice he was moving onto the cart, smiled and said, "Later, I'm busy right now." Ling-Er seemed more than happy to stay and watch, reaching out now and again to help straighten the pile so it didn't fall. A bit surprised at her eagerness, Mo-Run said, "Thank you." Thus she grew even more delighted, standing next to this tall, powerful man who practically radiated masculine allure. As she listened to his breathing and looked at his muscular shoulders, she couldn't help the blush that spread across her face. For a moment, she forgot all about things like distance and propriety between men and women. She clutched her handkerchief and said in a soft voice, "Shanjun, it's going to drip into your eyes if you don't wipe it." Mo-Run stayed busy. "I don't have hands free right now." "Then I can wipe it for you." She felt a chill at her back before she'd finished speaking. You know what extremely specific thing this reminds me of? This reminds me of that part in the first Captain America film when he first, transforms into, Captain America. And, wow, I can't remember the character's name, but I can remember the actress's name, Haley Atwell, because I believe this was like an outtake. Haley Atwell couldn't keep herself from touching his chest, but they just kind of like left it in because of course they would. Yeah. That's what this is reminding me of. She felt a chill at her back before she'd finished speaking. "Peggy! Thank you, Peggy." Without either of them noticing, Chuan-Ning had come over to stand behind them, still wearing Mo-Run's thick black outer robe draped over his shoulders. He looked listless and irritable, like he had just woken up. Mo-Run. Yes, the man who'd been so busy he had no time to even wipe his sweat immediately set down the grain in his arms and rubbed the tip of his nose as he turned, beaming brightly at the sight of Chuan-Ning. "Shizun, you're awake." Chuan-Ning looked him up and down. "Aren't you cold?" Mo-Run smiled. "I'm kind of hot, actually." Just then, the droplet of sweat that had been gathering at his dark brow dripped into his eye. He squeezed it shut with an "ah, yeah," but the other eye stayed stubbornly open to gaze upon his Shizun. Of course, he couldn't just ask a lady for her handkerchief, so he pleaded with Chu Wanning instead. Shizun, my eye. My handkerchief's hanging out to dry right now. Ling Er hurriedly offered, you can use mine. Paying her no heed, this poor girl, Chu Wanning stepped forward, features impassive as he leaned forward and tipped his head back to look up. He held the cuff of his snowy white sleeve closed as he raised his arm and used it to carefully wipe the sweat from Mo Run's brow. This poor girl. This poor girl. Can someone herald their lesbians, her, please? Like, put her out of her misery. Just lean over and be like, Ling Er, they're gay. Especially for each other. Oh, that was the end of the chapter. We're on page 213. For chapter 139, which is called Shizun Sweet Dreams. Considering some of the other dreams we've gotten so far, you know, Mo Run froze. He could smell the familiar fragrance of Hai Tang, and though Chu Wanning wore a straight face, the sleeve on his eyelid was gentle and careful as it wiped. But more importantly, this white-robed person was standing so close that Mo Run could see the fine lines in the texture of his lips, so close that all he had to do was dip his head down to kiss those lips, to take those tender petals between his own. You may have won, but you didn't wake me up, so it wasn't a fair match, Chu Wanning said as he finished wiping. Mo Run blinked, then smiled. But I didn't win. Shizun won. You didn't harvest anything more all afternoon? No, and there's not much left either. I went to the market, bought some things for the winter, and made a round through the village. That took up some time, Mo Run said. So Shizun reaped more than I did. Chu Wanning let out a cool humph, but seemed satisfied. After a moment, he asked, what did you buy at the market? Mattresses? Before Mo Run could reply, Ling Er, not wishing to be left out, cut in with a smile. Xianjun bought so much stuff, I felt bad for the poor horse that had to drag it all back. Honey! I mean, time period. But honey! It wasn't that much. Just coal and such, some meat and some sweets. Not only that, Ling Er said, Xianjun also went and bought a mattress for every family in the village. It was so many that the grandma who fluffs the cotton just up and came back to the village with him with her whole cart full. What? Chu Wanning was a bit astonished. Me too. Where did you get the money? I have some savings, Mo Run said with a smile. And the mattresses were pretty reasonable too, much cheaper than the ones they sell in the upper cultivation realm. We're gonna have a moment. He's never gonna... Every single time he does something kind, it's going to be a fucking moment for me. And she did this on purpose, is the thing. What's the meat for? Impulse purchase. I gave it to the village chief to roast and share with everyone tomorrow. Ah! Chu Wanning's face remained carefully neutral as he asked, and the sweets? Ling Er clapped her hands with a giggle. For the kids in the village, of course. Miao Xianjun gave out the sweets first thing when he got back. There was malt sugar candy and osmanthus cake. The kids were over the moon. Not many of them have had treats like that before. She paused, then said happily, I got one too. The girl was sociable and acted familiar with everyone. Chu Wanning hadn't minded the other time she interjected, but this time he shot her a cold glare. Was it good? Ling Er answered freely, super good, very sweet. A sardonic smile tugged at Chu Wanning's lips. Then help yourself to more, he said indifferently before walking away with a sweep of his sleeves. Mo Run didn't know what he'd done to upset him this time. He was about to give chase when something black blotted out his entire field of vision. Chu Wanning had tossed the robe he'd draped across his shoulders at Mo Run's face. Mo Run pulled it off and looked anxiously back at him. Shizun, what are you doing naked like that? I'm freezing just looking at you, Chu Wanning snapped. Put on your clothes. he said, both out of jealousy and also I'm like a, hot iron rod whenever you're running around half naked. So if you could cover up, that would do me a favor. Mo Run was rendered speechless. He truly was quite warm, but he quickly and silently pulled the robe on anyway, since Chu Wanning had said so. The fabric was instantly soaked with sweat and stuck uncomfortably to his skin. At a loss, he gazed at his Shizun through downcast lashes. Chu Wanning lowered his sharp brows. Fix your collar. Don't just leave it open for the world to see. Indecent. Protesting too much. Although Chu Wanning is kind of, he doth protest too much, the character, a little bit. Mutely, Mo Run pulled his lapels closed, folding them tight and high so that not a sliver of skin was left exposed, yet all that did was impart him with a kind of untouchable allure instead. For some reason, the sight of it made Chu Wanning even angrier. He cursed under his breath and walked away with a flick of his sleeves, leaving Mo Run to stare blankly after him like a dumb dog. The village chief, his wife, and Ling Er were all flummoxed as they watched this exchange. Ling Er said, somewhat disconcerted, "This Shenjun sure is scary. I've never seen such a strange-tempered person before." She spoke quietly in sympathetic, fawning tones, turning her head as she muttered, "Your master is so mean to you. You're really patient, putting up with all—" The words died on her lips as her eyes met Mo Run's. That usually smiling and easy-going Mo Shenjun wore a dark expression, and there was a terrifying, wolf-like ferociousness in his eyes. Her mouth snapped shut, and Mo Run turned his face away, somewhat obscuring his features. Ling Er could feel her heart race. She was unsure if it was merely her imagination, or if this person, who was usually so calm and serene, like a sturdy mountain, really had revealed a starkly different face of savagery for an instant. "Sorry," Mo Run mumbled. "You guys go ahead first. I'm going to go check on him." He set off with broad strides. Mo Run found Chu Wanning by the bank of the river, where reeds danced along the shore, and the setting sun sank into rippling waters. Mo Run came to a stop behind him, a little short of breath from how fast he had run. "Shizun." No reply. "Did I do something wrong?" "No." "Then why are you so displeased?" "I'm plenty pleased." Mo Run blinked. "Huh?" Turning to look over his shoulder, Chu Wanning said grouchily, "I'll be as displeased as I please." Mo Run didn't want to play word games with Chu Wanning. He studied his expression instead, then smiled as realization dawned. "I know why Shizun is upset." Chu Wanning's hands balled into fists within his billowing sleeves, and though he maintained a calm expression, his shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. "I already said I'm not—" But Mo Run had walked over to stand under the tree with him, grinning with a hand behind his back. The old banyan tree at the riverbank had thick roots protruding above ground, like hardy veins that burrowed deep into the earth. Standing on one of these roots, Mo Run looked even taller than he already was. Alarmed and a touch annoyed, Chu Wanning said, "Get down here." "Alrighty." Mo Run hopped lightly down and landed in front of Chu Wanning. The tree was so massive and sprawling that there was very little space not occupied by its roots. Chu Wanning stood in one such spot, and Mo Run had little other ground to stand on besides the patch right next to him. As he waited with his head lowered, Mo Run's breaths were practically caressing Chu Wanning's lashes. Chu Wanning was so uncomfortable he ended up demanding with a gloomy expression, "Go stand up there again." Mo Run couldn't help but grin. Up and down, is Shizun toying with me?" Chu Wanning knew he was being unreasonable in his irritation. Thus exposed, he simply refused to reply, remaining grimly silent. Mo Run revealed the hand he'd hidden behind his back. It held a surprise cargo of candy, a colorful little pile of rice paper-wrapped sweetness cupped in his palm. "Don't be mad. I saved some for you." Chu Wanning only grew more silently furious. He was so mad he could spit blood, flames of rage burning high into the heavens. Sword-like brows drawn low in anger, he eventually bellowed, "Mo Wei you!" Mo Run hurriedly snapped to attention. "Present!" "Who wants your stupid candy? What am I, a 3-year-old? Some village maiden? I don't want—" A piece of candy had been stuffed into his mouth. Chu Wanning froze in shock. His face flushed bright red all the way to the tips of his ears. Whether in anger or embarrassment was anyone's guess. and his phoenix eyes were as wide as they could go as he glared at the grinning man before him with a mixture of shock and fury. "It's milk-flavored," Mo-Run said. "Your favorite." Chu-Wan-Ning found himself a little speechless and a little powerless, like a cat with its claws clipped, hissing and bristling, yet completely harmless. He savored the milk candy. A small strand of hair by his temple, loosened when he'd stomped off earlier, fluttered softly like a tender leaf in the breeze. Staring at it, Mo-Run had the irresistible urge to reach out and tuck it back in. Mo-Run was a man of action. He thought. So he did. Chu-Wan-Ning's speechlessness intensified. "I got some candies and pastries for everyone in the village," Mo-Run said with a smile, "but I tucked the best candies in my sleeve for Shizun, and I left the best pastries in your room. I got you Lotus Crisps, really pretty ones. Eat them in secret when you get back. Don't let the little ones see, or they'll want some too." Chu-Wan-Ning said nothing, standing in the field of reeds beneath the banyan tree. A long moment passed before he rolled the melting milk candy on his tongue and gazed up at the person standing before him. Finally, he tossed out the words, "A honey-glazed lotus root." Mo-Run grinned. "Yep." "Stewed crab meatballs." "Yeah." Chu-Wan-Ning silently turned his head away. He felt like he had discarded a little too much of his dignity today, and he should pick it back up and dust it off. So he pointedly straightened his spine and lifted his chin slightly as he said, "Too bad there isn't any pear blossom white wine." "Well, now that you said it." He must have thought he looked very stern and imposing that way, and it might have had such an effect in the past, when Mo-Run had been younger and shorter than him. Little did he know that this posture now served only to give Mo-Run a better view of his gently sloping jawline, his exposed throat, and his porcelain-fair neck. He was like an arrogant cat flaunting its softest spot in front of a wolf's fangs, conceited and oblivious, thinking it was intimidating the wolf, when in truth the wolf wanted nothing more than to take the cat's throat between his jaws, to lick and to kiss, to eat him whole. What a dummy. It took an enormous amount of willpower for Mo-Run to tear his gaze from the underside of Chu-Wan-Ning's jaw, but his eyes were a little darker and his voice a bit deeper as he looked at the person in front of him. He forced himself to smile, conducted himself the way a man of integrity would, and said, "I got that too." Chu-Wan-Ning didn't quite follow at first and asked with furrowed brow, "What?" "Pear blossom white." Keeping his expression carefully steady, Mo-Run exhaled quietly as he squashed that burning desire inside of himself. His voice came out a little rough. "I got pear blossom white, too." Chu-Wan-Ning stared in silence. "It occurred to me on the way back that Shizun might want it," Mo-Run explained. "Good thing I picked some up." Chu-Wan-Ning glared at this disciple who had pulled out all the stops to please him and found himself at a loss for words. Perhaps, he suddenly thought, there was really no point to being so difficult, no point to this veneer of coldness. He finally relaxed by degrees, leaning against the old banyan tree as he studied the young man before him. "Mo-Run. You've changed." For a split second, he thought he caught a hint of unease in the depths of Mo-Run's eyes, but then Mo-Run's thick eyelashes fluttered and he asked, "Does Shizun like it?" Chu-Wan-Ning eyed him for a long moment. "I don't dislike it." Then, as if remembering something, he straightened up and raised a hand that hesitated midair for a beat, before coming to rest on Mo-Run's side. Mo-Run flinched, looking down at Chu-Wan-Ning in apprehensive confusion. "I read about your battle with the drought demon of Yellow River," Chu-Wan-Ning said. "Is this where you were injured?" A long pause, then, Chu-Wan-Ning sighed softly and clapped Mo-Run on the shoulder. "You've done well. The title of Mo-Zong-She is well deserved." This disciple wouldn't presume. A small smile tugged at Chu-Wan-Ning's lips, and he poked Mo-Run between the brows with that same hand. Then again, running around half-naked all day is indeed no way for a Zong-She to behave. "It's getting late. Let's head back and turn in for the night. What's the plan for tomorrow?" I had fully stopped. I had seized. My entire nervous system had shut down. Bated breath? Understatement. I was, I was right there. I was right there. I was fully waiting. Mo-Run thought for a second before saying, I think there was something about cooking the rice to make rice cakes. Chu Wan-ning nodded. He suddenly said, don't just randomly take off your clothes anymore. Mo-Run's face went red. Got it. Take a break if you're hot from working. Okay. Chu Wan-ning mulled it over for a bit, then added, remember to bring your own handkerchief, and don't dally around with unmarried girls. Do you have a handkerchief? Feeling a little self-conscious, Mo-Run replied, no. Then what do you use to wipe your face? Feeling even more abashed over his own crudeness, Mo-Run hesitated before eventually saying, my sleeves? Chu Wan-ning stared at him for a moment. I'll make you one sometime. Mo-Run's eyes brightened. For me? Mo-Run was ecstatic. I can't wait. When is Shizun going to make it? Chu Wan-ning's brows drew together slightly. After we're done here, at the very least. Then, I want one with high tongue flowers too. Is that okay? Chu Wan-ning eyed him, then said, I'll see what I can do. There's a scene break. Overcome with joy over the promised handkerchief he'd earned in exchange for a handful of candy, Mo-Run floated on cloud 9 all night, rolling around in his new-bought quilt, too happy to sleep. He had spent these last 5 years in a fog of agonizing misery. This was the first time he couldn't sleep because of joy instead. His heart kept racing and wouldn't calm down. In the end, he gave in and sat up. His window was right across from Chu Wan-ning's. He opened it a crack and leaned on the sill, taking in the refreshing scent of night in the countryside as he gazed into the small courtyard and at the candlelight across the way. Chu Wan-ning was still up. What was he doing? Was he considering designs for the handkerchief, or was he eating the Lotus Crisp? Was he doing anything related to me? Mo-Run watched that warm yellow light in the room across from his for a long, long time, all the way until the light was snuffed out and Chu Wan-ning went to bed, before wistfully murmuring, Shizun, sweet dreams. And something else kept tucked away deep inside, something he dared not speak aloud even if no one would hear. Wan-ning, sweet dreams. This shifty bitch, I swear to God. That's the end of the chapter. We're on page... I don't like her. We're on page 223 for chapter 140, which is called Shizun Turnover. She thinks she's funny. She thinks she's so hilarious. We're gonna take our break now, which means a couple of fun things are about to happen. On that note, let's see who won Volume 3 of Erha. Let me get right over here. You won't see this. I'll only see this. I'm gonna go right over here. I have everyone's names who commented that they wanted to be entered over the past couple of streams. I have everybody's names, and I am now going to hit randomize, and whoever is at the top wins the volume. Let's see. Kelly's Chaos is the winner. Kelly's Chaos. If you are here, I actually don't know if you're here. Let me click you over. If you are here, Kelly's Chaos, wave your hand, and I will congratulate you. But also, I mean, congratulations notwithstanding. I mean, regardless. So Kelly's Chaos. I'm gonna say this name as many times as possible. You can find me on Tumblr under Gaywatch. If you're a member of the Patreon, you can head on over there. I technically still have a Twitter account, but if you need to contact me through there, that's fine. I'm Brit DIA on Twitter, and then over on Blue Sky, I'm Gaywatch. I'm just Gaywatch on Blue Sky. Any one of those places, go ahead and send me a private message, and we will get all the details sorted so that I can send you Volume 3 of Erha that you won. Is she in here? I don't think she's in here. I haven't seen her name, but she won. So whenever you can get into contact with me, I'm just going to call you Kelly. Whenever you can get into contact with me, Kelly, we will get this sent right over to you for this lovely, beautiful, like, this is one of my favorite volumes, may just be one of my favorite volumes in the whole series. So I'm actually very, very happy that if anything was going to happen with like getting extra copies and needing to do something, I'm glad it was this one. So congratulations, Kelly. I'm so happy for you. I can't wait to send this to you. I'm going to have to write you a little note or something. And now you guys get to see the Gaywatch break room and tell me if you guys like it or not and you want to keep it. It can be decorated in many different ways. But one of the great things about Spirit City the Lo-Fi sessions is that they have lots of little things that are queer and queer friendly. There's tons of stuff. And I always appreciate that because God knows they must get a lot of crap for doing that, but they do it anyway, and they make a point of doing it. And that means, obviously, a lot to me and anyone here at this channel, I imagine. So you will not see me. You will just hear my voice. Oh, maybe if that. Just in case you can't, because I actually may not have set it up so that you can. So just in case you can't, it's going to be a shot of the whole room, and it's going to take me a second to get the sound effects going. You can zoom in on different things, but for today, I'm going to leave it at the widest view so that you guys can get a really good look at the room, okay? And then we're still going to have lo-fi. Everything's going to be the same. You just have a new thing to look at. So give me a second while I get it ready for you, and that should be what you see, all right? We take a break. I try to keep it to about 10 minutes or less. It'll probably be more like 10 minutes today. And then when I come back, we will keep reading Volume 4. Alrighty, here is the Gaywatch break room that I have for you guys. And we are back. How does the room look to you guys? I clocked the couple of comments about, more rainbows. I went with the wallpaper because it's one of my favorite wallpapers that they offer. And the trans ribbons along the walls went so beautifully with that I was like, we gotta do the trans pride along the walls, at least for this wallpaper. But then I'm also silly and missed a couple of opportunities. Like, there's a rainbow spread for the bed that I did not put in that would go, like, perfectly with the rest of it that I did not go grab, and I will be doing that. And of course, there's rainbow stuff and different pride flags of clothes that she could be wearing that I did not do. And hello, that's kind of obvious. There will obviously be different designs and louder designs, of course. I'm sure I'm going to do something super over the top for like Gaywatch's 5-year anniversary, like for May. And then of course, Gay Pride in June, and also my birthday, like hello. They just added a kitchen, so there's actually a whole other room that I've only just started exploring because they literally dropped it yesterday. But obviously, I'm going to look into doing stuff with that as well. This just opens so many opportunities to have a perfect little cozy place, to have the break for these streams. I cannot believe I didn't think of it till just now. But we are on page 223, once again, for chapter 140, which is called Shizune Turnover. I won't lie to you, this might be my favorite chapter title. That's fairly predictable of me. I don't care. If it's not Shizune Turnover, what could it possibly be in my brain? The music never went through. I'll double check that. Thank you, War Dove. Oh, also a great name. I'll double check that for next time because that should have. Well, let's see. She baited and switched me with the whole dream title last time. And she's going to be doing it again for this chapter. Because obviously it's not literal. However. Thanks to Mo Run's well wishes, Chu Waning did indeed dream that night. Unfortunately, it wasn't the sweet kind. In his dream, he was back at Butterfly Town during the Heavenly Rift. However, the person mending the great tear in the sky with him wasn't Mo Run, but Shimei. Working amidst heavy snow falling from an ashen sky, Shimei couldn't hold out. A horde of ghosts stabbed him through the heart, and he fell from the coiled dragon pillar to the endless snowy ground below. Mo Run rushed over to gather the bleeding Shimei into his arms. He knelt at Chu Waning's feet and begged him to help, to save his own disciple. Chu Waning wanted to save him too, but under the effect of the twinned barrier he had suffered the same grave injury as Shimei. Face drained of all color, he stood there wordlessly for fear that blood would come spilling out were he to part his lips, and that the teeming ghosts would rush them at once to tear them to pieces. Shizune, please, I'm begging you. Mo Run was weeping and kowtowing to him over and over. Chu Waning closed his eyes and fled. Shimei died. Mo Run never forgave him. He dreamt of Naiha Bridge at Xisheng Peak during a cold spell in late spring. It was raining, drops clinging to the tender beginnings of flowers and leaves on the trees, and the bluestone path beneath his feet seemed endless as he walked its length, holding an umbrella. In the distance, across the bridge, he saw another figure walking toward him, dressed in black with no umbrella, holding a stack of books wrapped in oil paper. Chu Waning unconsciously slowed his pace. That person had clearly noticed him as well, but his steps didn't slow. He only lifted those rain-laden lashes to cast him a single cold glance. Chu Waning wanted to call out to him, wanted to say, but Mo Run didn't allow him the chance to speak. Clutching his books, he walked as far to the left as he could without falling into the river, in order to get as far away as he could from his Shizune on the right. They met in the middle of the bridge. One who usually used an umbrella, walking in the rain, and one who never had the habit of using one, also in the rain. They passed each other by. The one enduring the rain kept walking without so much as a backward glance, but the one under the shelter of the umbrella stopped, standing rooted in place. Rain pattered against the oiled paper. Chu Wanning stood there for a long time, so long his legs began to go numb, as if the damp cold of the Sichuan air had sunk into his very bones. He suddenly felt an exhaustion so crushing he couldn't take another step. The dream was swallowed by black. It was cold and heavy. Cold like the rain, heavy like legs that refused to move. Chu Wanning turned over in his sleep and curled into a tiny ball. Wetness slid from the corner of his eye and soaked into the pillow. He vaguely knew that it was only a dream. But why, then, was it so realistic? So much so that he could clearly feel Mo-Run's hatred, his disappointment, his spurn. Was that it? Was that how it ended? He refused to accept it. Perhaps it was this refusal that made the dreamscape light up again. He was back in that same dream, many months after Chimay's passing. Mo-Run's temperament grew gloomier by the day, and he spoke less and less. He still came to his cultivation lessons, but only to sit and listen, and he never spoke a word more to Chu Wanning than he had to. Chu Wanning had never explained why he hadn't saved Xu Jing back then. Seeing Mo-Run's attitude, he knew nothing he said would change things now that they had come to this point. One day, during a cultivation lesson, Mo-Run stood at the tip of a pine tree as instructed, working on concentrating spiritual energy. But for some reason, he collapsed without warning and plummeted right off the tree. Chu Wanning flew up to catch him without a thought, but he didn't have time to cast anything, and the two fell heavily to the ground below. Luckily, the soil was soft and covered with a thick layer of pine needles. Neither of them was much injured, save for Chu Wanning's wrist, which had been slashed open by a sharp branch and was seeping blood. Mo-Run looked at the wound, and then, for the first time in months, lifted his eyes to look directly at Chu Wanning's face. He said eventually, "Shizun, you're bleeding." His tone was a little stiff, but at least the words were pacifying. "There are salve and bandages in my Changkun pouch. Best to take care of it straight away." They sat on the thick cushion of needles, the refreshing scent of pine drifting in the air. Chu Wanning said nothing, as he watched Mo-Run wordlessly wrap the bandage around his wrist with his head bowed. Though he couldn't see the expression on Mo-Run's face, he could see the minute quivering of his lashes. For a moment he wished he could gather up the courage to ask, "Mo-Run, do you really hate me that much?" But the breeze was so gentle, the sunlight so warm. Birds and bugs chirped between the branches, and his injured hand was held lightly between Mo-Run's as he wrapped the bandage. Everything was so quiet and peaceful. In the end, he didn't ask, didn't shatter the picture of serenity. He suddenly felt like the answer wasn't that important anyway. What was important in this dream after Chimay's death was that his blood, his injury, could buy back just a wisp of Mo-Run's rationality, could ease the tension between them just a touch. This feels silly that it never occurred to me that he could dream of another life more so than a past life for him. It should have occurred to me that this could happen. Did it? No. I feel tremendously silly. I should have thought of this. There's a scene break, by the way. Chu Wanning woke up dazed the next day. Lying in bed, he could still feel the lingering warmth and the ache in his wrist. Some minutes passed before he rubbed his face in exhaustion. Ridiculous. What was that nonsense in his dream? It was said that dreams were a manifestation of one's private thoughts. Could it be that he was so miffed by how beautiful Chimay had grown that he had to vent these emotions in a dream about Chimay's death? How absurd. He rose from his bed and got ready for the day, washing, dressing, and putting up his hair. Soon enough, he'd forgotten all about the night's fragmented visions. The villagers were making rice cakes. In the lower cultivation realm, rice cakes were an absolute must for New Year's Eve, believed to bring good fortune in the next year. Both short-grain, non-glutinous rice and glutinous rice that had been ground into flour the night before were steamed by the women and elderly over hot stove. hot stoves. It was grammatically correct. It was me who screwed up. It was a laborious process, but didn't require the aid of younger menfolk, so Chu Wanning slept in a little and took his time strolling over. When he arrived, he saw a giant wok propped over a fire in an open field, with a wooden barrel half as tall as a man set over it, billowing with hot steam. The village chief's wife stood on a footstool, adding rice flour to the barrel every now and again. A couple of kids ran around the wok, playing and occasionally pulling a fistful of roasted peanuts or a corn cob from the fire pit using metal tongs. What Chu Wanning hadn't expected was that Mo Run had gotten up early as usual and was helping the village chief's wife tend to the stove. One of the kids, running a bit too fast, tripped, sniffled, and burst into tears. Mo Run helped her up and patted the dust off her clothes, asking, "Oh no, you tripped? Are you hurt anywhere?" My hand, the little girl, still bawling, lifted her dirty little palm to show Mo Run. Mo Run scooped her up, walked over to the well, and drew a bucket of clean water to wash her hand with. From a distance, Chu Wanning couldn't hear what he said to the child, but the little girl choked back her tears, sniffled for a while, then stopped crying. In due time, she smiled, then looked up at Mo Run with snot smeared on her little face and began chattering away at him. Chu Wanning watched quietly from behind a corner as he coaxed the little girl. "I'm not going to get tripped up on little again. It's not going to happen. I reject that reality and substitute my own." Watched as he carried her back to the fire pit, watched as he retrieved a sweet potato from the fire, peeled it, and put it in the little girl's hands. He watched it all from where he stood, as if seeing the last 5 years of Mo Weiyu's life. "Oh, Shizun is here?" After a long moment, Chu Wanning walked over to sit down beside Mo Run. He watched the roaring flames lick the underside of the wok for a spell, then asked, "What's in there?" "Peanuts, sweet potatoes, corn," Mo Run answered. "And now that you're here, a piece of candy for you." "Candy can be roasted?" "It'll be burnt candy if Shizun does it, though," Mo Run teased with a smile. "Let me." So saying, he produced a piece of milk candy from his pocket and removed the rice paper wrapping. He clasped it in the fire tongs and held it in the flames for a few brief seconds before pulling it back out and taking the candy. He sucked in a breath and said, "It's hot," then blew on the sweet to cool it before holding it to Chu Wanning's lips. "Try it." Chu Wanning wasn't used to eating out of someone else's hand, so he reached out and took the candy himself. The creamy white candy was warm and soft from the fire, bringing out the sweet, milky flavor as he chewed. Chu Wanning said, "Not bad. Roast another." So Mo Run roasted another, and Chu Wanning took it to eat as before. Another. Mo Run obligingly roasted 8 candies in a row. As he was roasting the 9th, a little kid ran over to ask him for a sweet potato. Mo Run didn't have a hand free and had to ask Chu Wanning to do it instead. If Chu Wanning is this insatiable about food. Chu Wanning took the other pair of fire tongs and picked out the biggest one. Mo Run looked over and said, "Put that one back, get the small one next to it. The bigger ones are tastier." "The bigger ones aren't cooked through yet." "Oh, excuse me, the bigger ones aren't cooked through yet," Mo Run said with a smile. Chu Wanning was unconvinced. "How do you know it's not cooked?" "Just trust me, I roast sweet potatoes in the wild all the time. Give him the small one, those are sweeter." So Chu Wanning retrieved the small one instead. The little kid had no idea what a big name Chu Wanning was in the cultivation world. He only knew that he was willing to help him pick sweet potatoes. He sidled over and said in a small voice, "Dagaga, I want the big one." "Tell that to the other Dagaga," Chu Wanning said. "He's the one who won't let you have it. He says it's not cooked yet." The little guy really did run right over to Mo Run. "Mo Run Gaga, I want the big one." "You'll have to wait a while longer if you want the big one," Mo Run said. "How long is a while?" "Count to 100. "But I can only count to 10, the kid moaned. Mo Run grinned. "Guess you'll have to eat the small one then." The little guy sighed dramatically, but could do nothing but accept this injustice. His head drooped, and he muttered, "Fine, the small one then." Chu Wanning set about peeling the sweet potato for him. He was almost done when the candy Mo Run was roasting got to its softest point. Any more and it would melt. Mo Run hastily pulled it out and offered it to Chu Wanning. "Shizun, open your mouth." Hands full of sweet potato, Chu Wanning opened his mouth without a second thought. It wasn't until Mo Run and popped the warm, soft milk candy onto his tongue, the coarse pad of his thumb brushing lightly past the corner of his lips, that Chu-Wan-Ning abruptly realized that he had eaten a sweet right out of his own disciple's hand. The tips of his ears grew bright red. More? That was a question mark. I was perhaps too beside myself to emphasize it. More? Because it's Mo-Run asking. Chu-Wan-Ning cleared his throat, but luckily the color on his face was camouflaged by the warm glow of the fire. I'm good. Mo-Run smiled. Just enough to fill you up. There's only one piece of milk candy left and no more, even if you wanted it. Am I a pervert or... I mean, I know the answer to this question, but you know what I mean. Is this just directly... Well, not directly. Indirectly reflecting certain attitudes later? You know? I'm not the only one thinking it. Relaxed and at ease, he had spoken carelessly and thoughtlessly, uttering without a thought a phrase like, See? I'm not crazy. I'm not insane. Nope. I only pick this stuff up because she puts it down, you know what I mean? Relaxed and at ease, he had spoken carelessly and thoughtlessly, uttering without a thought a phrase like fill you up. Such words were completely inappropriate from a disciple to his Shizun, words that smacked of pampering and domineering, like an owner feeding his pet, an emperor satisfying his concubine, words that could be applied to matters between the sheets, the conqueror above using his scorching hot body to fill up the moaning person beneath. Chu-Wan-Ning was dazed for a solid minute, drowning in those crude words. I mean, Chu-Wan-Ning's the one who did the work of the entire last paragraph, though. So, I don't know if this is entirely Mo-Run's fault. You know what I'm saying? When the rice was done steaming, and ditto Chu-Wan-Ning, the next step required hard physical labor. I'm sure it did. All the young men in the village used wooden mallets to pound the rice cakes. The village chief handed Mo-Run a wooden mallet wrapped in gauze and was about to give Chu-Wan-Ning one as well when Mo-Run held out a hand to stop him. He smiled. Village chief, my Shizun has never done this before. He wouldn't be any good at it. Chu-Wan-Ning was speechless. He was quite affronted, a little indignant even. From the day he'd left the temple, he'd never been anything but competent and reliable. All he ever heard from others were requests and pleas. Things like, Shenjun, please help with this and that. This was the first time someone had ever stepped before him and said, he doesn't know how, he wouldn't be any good at it. Chu-Wan-Ning was irritated. He wanted to fling his sleeves and thunder, who are you calling no good? But he held himself back. Mo-Run wasn't wrong. He really wouldn't be any good at it. The village chief pointed them toward a stone mortar with a ball of steaming cooked rice flour inside. Mo-Run said, Shizun, when we get started, turn the rice cake over every 3 strikes. Be careful not to burn your hands and don't do it too fast. I don't want to accidentally hit you. If you manage to hit me pounding rice cakes, you may as well quit cultivating and go be a farmer instead. Mo-Run grinned. I'm just saying, just in case. Chu-Wan-Ning wasn't about to waste any more breath on him, not least because the pair next to them had already gotten started and he didn't want to be outdone. He stood beside the stone mortar and said, get to it. Oh, turn over. I got you. I'm there. I'm here now. Uh-huh. Yeah. Message received. Meat bun, thank you. Mo-Run swung the mallet. The very first strike landed heavy and solid, sinking into the softly steaming rice flour. He swung 2 more times, then looked up at Chu-Wan-Ning with bright eyes and said, all together now, Shizun, turn over. Chu-Wan-Ning turned the ball of rice flour over, and Mo-Run continued pounding. It took only a few rounds for them to find the rhythm. Every 3rd time Mo-Run lifted the mallet, Chu-Wan-Ning would nimbly turn the rice flour ball over, and the strike would come down just as his hands withdrew. Rice cake pounding might have looked simple, but it had to be carefully controlled, and the person doing the pounding had to have strength and stamina both. It took countless rounds of turning and pounding to make the rice flour sticky and stretchy enough to call the job done. After a while, Mo-Run was still swinging his mallet with ease, but the villagers next to him were flagging. They started shouting, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, to the rhythm of the pounding. Intrigued, Mo-Run followed along. By the time the rice flour balls were half sticky, everyone else was heaving with exhaustion, but Mo-Run was unfussed, smiling as he said to Chu Wan-ning, again. Chu Wan-ning glanced at him. The young man's brow was covered in sweat, making his honey-brown skin sparkle under the sunlight. His lips were slightly parted. He wasn't panting like the others, but his breathing was a little heavier, the rise and fall of his chest a little more pronounced. Conscious of Chu Wan-ning's eyes on him, he paused before wiping his face with his sleeve, eyes bright like stars as he smiled. What is it? Did I get flour on my face? No. Then... When Chu Wan-ning saw how hot and sweaty he was, and how he persisted in keeping his lapels properly folded all the way to his throat, Chu Wan-ning unexpectedly felt a little sorry for him. He asked, Are you hot? Yesterday he had asked Mo-Run if he was cold, and today he was asking if he was hot. Mo-Run was confused. Understandably. The temperature had been pretty much the same both days. He stared blankly for a beat before answering, I'm all right. Take that off if you're hot. Shizun doesn't like it, so I won't. A long pause. I like it even less when you're all sweaty. Protest too much the character, I'm telling you. Since Chu Wan-ning had said so, and the clothes were indeed uncomfortably sticky, Mo-Run went ahead and removed his outer robe and inner shirt, tossing them aside on the millstone. Chu Wan-ning's gaze was icy, when in truth his heart was growing warmer and warmer. He stared at Mo-Run standing beside the millstone, at his broad shoulders and back, and those firmly toned arms, and could practically feel the rush of warm air as Mo-Run pulled off his inner shirt. Mo-Run really was sweaty all over, his skin covered in a glossy sheen under the sunlight. Like a merman emerging from the water, he turned and smiled at Chu Wan-ning, looking dizzyingly, heart-racingly handsome. The village chief's wife was going around, offering everyone tea. I'm far too destroyed. When she reached them, she asked, Would you like a cup? Mo-Run strode back over to the mortar and picked up the mallet again as he replied with a smile, I'm not thirsty, but thank you. A hand reached over and took a cup of tea from the tray. As Mo-Run and the village chief's wife both watched in awe, Chu Wan-ning gulped down the entire cup in one go before returning it empty. One more, please. Shizun, are you that thirsty? Yes. How thirsty is he? Yes. Somehow pricked by the question, Chu Wan-ning's head snapped up, eyes bright and tone cagey as he said, Thirsty? No, I'm not thirsty at all. Then he gulped down another whole cup. Watching him, Mo-Run was baffled. When had Shizun's pride gotten so out of hand that he couldn't even admit to being thirsty? You know, I think Meat Bun might be having a little too much fun. That was the end of the chapter. Where... Oh! I don't like her. I don't. I simply don't. Page 234, or excuse me, 235, for chapter 141, which is called Shizun, Don't Strip. With an exclamation point, mind. Yeah. Shizun turnover is going to be a really tough one to beat. That's going to be difficult. But Don't Strip, that one's pretty good. Why am I turning the page? I'm so flustered. This woman is having far too much fun. She's really just shamelessly having as much fun as she possibly can. The two of them got back to work after their tea, but Chu Wan-ning knew he was in for it as soon as Mo-Run lifted the mallet. The vigorous motion made the lines of the young man's body look all the more taut and defined. I mean, we all know that, not to make another Marvel reference, but we all know that the moment Robert Downey Jr. arrived in the national consciousness was when he was hammering out the mask at the beginning of the first Iron Man film in 2008. We all know this. It is a simple fact, so it's not like I can judge Chu Wan-ning for his taste. I remember the moment I was in the theater when that happened. For crying out loud. The sun's golden rays poured over his skin like a waterfall, sliding over his sensual, chiseled muscles. He lifted his arms, and his already wide shoulders appeared even broader. The muscles of his smooth chest were like sun-baked rocks, firm and solid, harboring an intense heat and strength. The wooden mallet slammed into the mortar, sank deep inside the moist softness of the rice cake, and trailed a sticky white as it lifted again. It was one swing after another with that immense, inexhaustible strength. Chu Wan-ning thought that if he were really accidentally hit by Mo Run's strike, as he had warned, he just might be crushed under him, shattered into pieces. That might be the most fun I've ever seen an author have in a paragraph. Also, man, Chu Wan-ning is going to have damp robes in the near future if he doesn't find something else to focus on. Mo Run concentrated as he worked, his breath coming heavier now, chest rising and falling to the beat of his heart. Sweat clung to his brows and the jet of his throat bobbed slightly every now and again. The muscles in his arms flexed with each swing. Watching him, Chu Wan-ning suddenly couldn't help but recall that dream he used to have over and over. In it, he had lain on Mo Run's bed, being thrust into like the rice cake in the mortar, being kneaded and humiliated until his body went soft. He stared off into space until he heard Mo Run calling him. Shizun. Or maybe Mo Run had called him several times already. Shizun. Shizun? Chu Wan-ning snapped out of it, but his heart raced madly in his chest and a faint light wavered in the depths of his eyes. His throat bobbed and his eyes were a little unfocused as he responded. Mo Run's clear gaze was fixed on him from above. The heat of his body made his eyes seem even more fiery than usual. He said, Shizun, turn over. So help me if this man turns around. Chu Wan-ning was miles away, lost in that gaze, in those words. He felt dreams and reality folding into one another, becoming as one. He suddenly felt dizzy, scarlet red flashing before his eyes. He saw two people tumbling in red bedding embroidered in gold with a dragon and phoenix, a well-built man on top of another, tumultuous waves of red in an ocean of desires, the toes of the man beneath tightly curled, his calves twitching. Shizun, turn over. He could practically feel that man's hot breaths against the back of his ear. Let me see your face while I fuck you. Shocked by the images that had risen in his mind, unbidden, Chu Wan-ning squeezed his eyes shut and shook his head. What was that? A hallucination? Or an overly vivid recollection of that dream? Heart thudding, he could feel the slide of cold sweat over his skin, even as hot blood raced through his veins. Octagonal, I caught that. Sensing something amiss, Mo Run put down the wooden mallet and came to his side. Shizun, what's wrong? Are you feeling okay? I'm fine. Even Mo Run's voice made Chu Wan-ning's heart tingle like it was being nibbled by insects. Chu Wan-ning shoved him forcefully away, hating the way his own mind had betrayed him. He raised his eyes in a furious glare, the corners of those phoenix eyes tinged the faintest of reds of humiliation, breath coming heavy. The sun is too hot. I was just feeling a little dizzy. Don't stand so close to me. You're all sweaty. There's a fantastic song by The Police called Don't Stand So Close to Me. Just throwing that out there. Morun glanced down at him and pardon me, collecting myself. Morun glanced down and at himself saw that he was indeed quite sweaty. Well aware that Chu Wanning was a stickler for cleanliness, he immediately stepped away and reproached himself. But his concerned gaze remained fixed on Chu Wanning, unwilling to look away for even a second. Chu Wanning kept to himself after that. By the time the rice cakes were steamed and everyone gathered to sit and eat, he was nowhere to be found. Oh, Chu Xianjun? He said he had a bit of a headache, so he went back to rest in the cabin, the village chief said. His cheeks did look a little flushed. I hope he isn't running a fever. The moment Morun heard this, he grew anxious. He left off helping them store the rice cakes and instead dashed back to the small courtyard where the two were staying. Opening the door revealed only an empty bed, and he grew more anxious still. He heard the sudden sound of water sloshing from the kitchen and raced over, shoving the curtain aside, only to see Chu Wanning completely naked and standing barefoot on the red clay floor, in the middle of dunking a bucket of water over himself. It was the end of October, well into autumn. Was Chu Wanning fucking serious? Washing himself with cold water? Morun was completely dumbfounded, his face shifting between blue, then white, then red as he stared at his naked Shizun. He felt like he could hear nothing but the tumble of his blood flowing like the surging tides of the Changtong River. He couldn't believe his eyes. This was the first time since his rebirth that he was seeing Chu Wanning's body in its entirety, perfectly vivid and perfectly clear. No haze, no concealment, nothing. There was only a familiar physique, this body that tore down his defenses and slammed open the floodgates of his memories. He felt like all the blood in his body was boiling, surging like lava, trying to break free of his skin and flesh. Chu Wanning's body was exactly as he remembered. He suddenly found that he couldn't breathe. He could see the perfect curve of Chu Wanning's shoulders. I'm losing it. The lean strength in those lines, like that of a bow pulled taut, tension ready to be unleashed. He could see Chu Wanning's shoulder blades moving beneath skin as delicate and exquisite as thin ice. His gaze traveled down with the streams of water. Oh yes, it followed those rivulets as if they were carrying his gaze down, down, down to Chu Wanning's slender waist, to the dip of his back where two dimples lay. The water pooled within those dimples like an intoxicating liquor, promising to poison any who tried to slake their thirst on him. Even further down, and there were those pert-shapely buttocks. Oh, we have a butt man. Like autumn-ripe fruit, plump and sweet. Morun knew too well the exquisite ecstasy that would come from touching that fruit, knew the shuddering pleasure that came from joining with it. So intense it felt like his very soul might shatter and meld into the person beneath him. A heady, addicting flavor that drew him back, time and again. Mo Shenjun! All of a sudden, someone was calling for him. Mo Shenjun, are you there? Startled, Morun turned, but the door curtain was whipped aside before he could stop it. Ling Er! Chu Wanning's never going to live this down. He was never going to live it down when it was Morun. He's not going to live it down. Ling Er came through it, saying, "Why did you run off in such a hurry? My mom sent me to fetch you." Sure she did. "We're about to eat the sweet rice cakes. Do you..." She caught sight of the bathing Chu Wanning, and her voice died in her throat. Chu Wanning was frozen, speechless. Ling Er was also frozen, equally speechless, until the girl screamed, covering her eyes in a panic. Chu Wanning's expression was dark as could be as he scrambled for his clothing, uncharacteristically fumbling. When he'd first fled back to his room to cool off, there was no way he expected not one, but two uninvited guests to barge in on him. What the actual hell? He'd stripped as he entered the kitchen and dropped his clothing right by the door. He'd always been casual about these things. Was he now supposed to make his way across the length of the kitchen, stark naked, right in front of a young lady, to fetch his clothes? As he stood caught in this dilemma, Mo Run strode over and pressed his hands against the wall on either side of Chu Wanning, blocking him from view in a mock embrace. He turned and said to Ling Er, "Get out." "Oh, right, yes." The girl broke from her momentary stun and stumbled out in a hurry, running far away in shock. Chu Wanning remained completely silent. Mo Run's face was gloomy. Only after he made Only after he made sure the girl was really gone did he sigh in relief and turn his gaze back, only to meet with Chu Wanning's cold expression. He realized at once that his actions were very much like a ferocious hound protecting his food, baring his teeth to scare off intruders before turning back around, whimpering to lick and eat the hard-won prize. His arms were still braced against the wall. In order to keep Chu Wanning firmly shielded, he had pressed very close enough that he could pick up Chu Wanning's scent, and he froze unconsciously. Nobody fucking move. They chose the comical version of this moment, which I'm a little mad at them about. But still, just in case, and this is just me being paranoid, as I show this art to you, it's not showing anything, but I'm gonna be YouTube paranoid here for a second. So, like, we could have gone with just the more serious moment. I'm just saying. I realize I'm spoiled. I'm absolutely spoiled. But I'm just saying. I am so far beyond. I'm so far beyond. I have, like, been shot so far out of a cannon that I've just come right back around. I've traveled around the earth, and I am just now... I've lapped the earth. His head was burning, dizzy and heavy. Smell was the sense with the greatest power to evoke memories and desires. That's true. The aroma of meat would make one hungry, smelling plum blossoms would make one think of winter snow, and so on and so forth. Lust was no exception. Mo Run felt his mind surge, and the wall of determination he had so painstakingly erected seemed to crumble right there. Chu Wanning's scent was a spark that landed in Mo Run's hot and dry chest, igniting his animal instincts, ready to burn him to ash. In their daily life, Mo Run's heart would flutter despite himself any time he got close to Chu Wanning, regardless of how covered up and properly dressed he was, and now that person was before him, stark naked. He desperately wanted to seize Chu Wanning's icy cold wrists, still dripping with water, wanted to twist Chu Wanning around and push him against the wall while ripping his own clothes off, wanted to press his chest firmly against that man's back, wrap his arms around him, hold him down as he drove brutally into him. Just as he had in the previous life when he had held absolute power over this person, had indulged liberally in the sweet allure of shuddering breaths and sweat-slick bodies. He really couldn't take it anymore. He wanted him so badly. Mo Run's breathing abruptly turned heavy. He didn't speak, and neither did Chu Wanning make a sound. The two stood pressed against the wall, so close they would be touching if not for Mo Run's arms bracing himself, muscles taut and trembling as he endured. Do not touch him. Do not touch him. Respect him. Cherish him. Do not repeat these immoral absurdities. Do not. Have I ever told you guys that my shoulder was just twinged on me for a second? Sorry. Have I ever told you guys that the position they're in now is one of my favorite things? One of my favorite things. I don't know why. It makes the brain go burr. I don't know what to tell you. It's one of my favorite things. which is probably why I'm whining and demanding for a serious version of the art that we just saw. He told himself this again and again, mechanically repeating it in his mind. The weather was cold, but a thin sheen of sweat slowly began to form on his forehead. You can't, Mo-Run, you can't. Don't let your mind wander. He gulped and closed his eyes with a shudder, blocking out that scalding gaze, but there was already a dazed expression on his face. Normally, Chu Wan-ning would have sensed that something was strange, but right now he wasn't much better off than Mo-Run. Possibly worse. He might have looked calm and collected, but it took all his formidable willpower to keep this pretense alive. Mo-Run's breaths were so hot and heavy, carrying with them an intense masculine scent that threatened to scorch him, and the arms pressed against the wall were so powerful. Though he and Mo-Run had yet to spar since his return from the dead, Chu Wan-ning knew full well that in a match of physical strength, discounting spiritual power, those arms would completely dominate him, crush him into dust. Unwilling to meet Mo-Run's eyes, he lowered his gaze to Mo-Run's chest. Oh, that'll be helpful. Though they weren't pressed together, Mo-Run was standing so close that you could barely run a thread between them. Chu Wan-ning could distinctly feel the raw masculine tension radiating from that warm chest, engulfing him in its blaze. That heat could melt the coldest glacier in the world and turn it into an uncontrollably overflowing spring. She said, I'm going to take this whole last series to build up on a couple of different metaphors, and I'm not going to forget them. Shizun, he heard the young man say all of a sudden. He couldn't tell if it was his imagination, but he felt Mo-Run's voice sounded a little rough, filled with a steamy, heated lust. Mo-Run had called him Shizun many times before, calmly, respectfully, furiously, jokingly. But this was the first time Chu Wan-ning had ever heard Shizun said like this, nursed between his lips and teeth, ground together with raw lust, almost filthy, yet deeply alluring. It was enough to make Chu Wan-ning feel like his very bones were going numb. Impossible. Mo-Run would never address him like that. He'd heard wrongly. He was overthinking it. It was his heart that was filthy. He instinctively backed away. His naked back hit the ice-cold wall, eliciting... A bitch is doing her best. Okay? Whew. His naked back hit the ice-cold wall, eliciting an involuntary shudder, and his quivering lips parted slightly so that he looked almost helpless, vulnerable. Mo-Run's pupils darkened even further. He stared at those pale, dewy lips. Though he made no move, his imagination ran wild. He thought about lowering his head to press his lips to Chu Wan-ning's, prying them apart and brutally violating this virginal forbidden territory with his burning tongue. He thought about what it would be like to take Chu Wan-ning's waist in his hands, to hold him so bruisingly tight that he would leave marks on Chu Wan-ning's skin. No matter how he repressed himself, the blood of a wolf still surged in Mo-Run's veins. His natural instincts would always be scorching hot and violently ruthless. He would always tear the person he took to bed into shreds, devouring them whole from the inside out, lapping up every last drop of blood, every last morsel of flesh. He could never become tame. The thing is that you find yourself the right bottom, and they would never want you tamed in a million years. The mind reels as to who that perfect bottom could be. But, and like, that's the beauty of this moment. I'm taking a break for a second to collect myself. That's the beauty of this moment. You have a top so ragingly and brutally wanting to top. Meanwhile, the bottom so unbelievably and desperately wants to bottom. And that is a match made in heaven. ladies and gentlemen. That is simply, yeah. You know. We know. He closed his eyes as he suppressed the boiling lava in his chest. This was dangerous. He knew full well how men's desire, once awoken, made them little better than beasts. He knew that he needed to chase this oblivious rabbit away while he still had self-control left. He withdrew his hand and said, voice hoarse, Shizun, I'll go get your clothes. Thick and heavy breaths brushed against Chu Wanning's lashes. Get my hair out of here. Mo Run turned and walked toward the door in long strides to pick up Chu Wanning's discarded robes. Chu Wanning was still leaning against the wall. He felt completely drained, as if he had just run 100 miles and couldn't catch his breath. He narrowed his phoenix eyes a little and saw that Mo Run had his back to him, gathering the clothes he tossed aside as he'd stripped. Suddenly, Chu Wanning remembered the state of a certain body part and froze for a few long moments. His mind started racing. Oh God, no, that's right. He's naked now, and he just did this. Oh, Mo Run can't turn around. If Mo Run turns around, Chu Wanning, jump out a window. Something. When Mo Run had come in, wait, did I even write? No, okay, his mind started racing. When Mo Run had come in earlier, Chu Wanning had been sluicing himself off with his back to the door. When Chu Wanning had turned around, Mo Run had been pressed so close that he hadn't looked down, so he hadn't noticed the evidence of Chu Wanning's arousal. But if Mo Run were to turn around after picking up the clothes, then the Yuheng elder's haughty and pristine reputation, the aloof and ascetic image Chu Wanning had maintained for so long, would crumble to dust in an instant. Chu Wanning panicked. Mo Run had already sorted and tidied up his robes and was holding them in his hands. He was about to turn his head. Chu Wanning was left with only two choices. 1, pretend his legs suddenly hurt and crouch down. Or 2, jab his disciple's eyes out. Before he could settle on one of these two awful options, Mo Run had already turned. Shizun, you what? Mo Run didn't finish his sentence. At the sight before him, whatever he'd been about to say never made it past his lips. The words irretrievably lost. You're kidding! You're kidding! That's not how that happens! No! No! This is where we have to stop! This is where we have to stop! I have to go! Why is this the farm volume? The one with the worst cliffhangers! God damn it. God damn it! And the chapter title is, what was it again? Yeah. First of all, now she's just lampshading because we're on page 244, we're on page 245 for chapter 142, which is called Shizun, This is Cruel and Unusual. I don't fucking like this woman. Why? I cannot believe that is how that happens. I cannot believe that I have to stop until Tuesday. What's worse is that I know that my wife is home by now, and she's listening to her poor spouse lose her fucking mind, not having any idea as to why. Well, that's it for this stream. I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Congratulations to Kelly's Chaos for winning the giveaway. I'll go look for a message from you, Kelly, whenever you see this. And we'll get that squared away. I'll tweak the new Gaywatch break room so that it fully works and is even gayer next time. And I'll see you on Tuesday for more of this. I love you very much. Have a wonderful weekend. Take care of yourselves. And we'll be back here 3 p.m. on Tuesday.